Well, thank you, and thanks for everyone coming today. Can you all hear me all right? Yes. I've been provided with this sort of motivational speaker mic, which will enable me to move among you at various points. But being British, it means I'll stand behind this lectern most of the time. The question, is socialist worker still relevant, is a contested question, and a question that's been contested for a considerable period of time. On my notes for the meeting, I noticed, perhaps in a Freudian slip, I've written 50 years of socialist worker, is it still worth it? Which is perhaps a sharper form of the question. But to be honest, people have been asking, is it worth producing revolutionary propaganda and having revolutionary newspapers for a long time? Henry Hyneman, who was one of the earliest popularisers of Marx in Britain, set up an organisation called the Social Democratic Federation, the first Marxist organisation in Britain. He produced a paper called Justice for 28 years. And at the end of it, he wrote this: a purely propaganda sheet dealing with questions the mass of mankind would not wish to have thrust upon them. We would have done better to have expended our money and enthusiasm in some other direction. It was a fatal mistake which cannot be rectified and which engenders a sort of mania of obstinacy. So Hyneman, at the end of 28 years, his answer to that would have been no. I remain obstinate and perhaps manic about the question both of the necessity for socialist propaganda and for a newspaper like Socialist Worker. That doesn't mean, and by the way, this meeting shouldn't wholly be about, that I think developments in social media, which I'm going to talk about in the second half of the presentation, don't matter. I am the editor of Socialist Worker. I'm also the editor of socialistworker.co.uk, which I spend, and the rest of the journalistic team spends probably half their time thinking about and doing. So, you know, this isn't a meeting about saying 20 pages of print is the only requirement of revolutionary organisation. It is completely obvious, it is axiomatic, it is self-evident that in 2018 you have to have a presence on social media, and it's incredibly important to have a website and a presence on Socialist Worker. Nor is this meeting, by the way, a trip down memory lane. It's not intended to be everyone to stand up and say, oh, this is what I did in the 1980s with the paper. I can't stop you doing that if you want to, but that's not really what it's about. I know there are at least two members in the audience who claim to have sold the first copy of Socialist Worker. In different places, by the way. It's not that they had one copy and all that. They must have been in primary school or something. But it's not really just about that. I hope we can do... There's a serious question here. How do we put our ideas across? And this is what I hope to explore, because Socialist Worker comes not from a motivation to produce a newspaper, but from a requirement of revolutionary politics. And it is this: revolutionaries, in every situation, are a minority in society. Generally a small minority. In Britain today, we, for example, are an organisation of a few thousand people in a population of 65 million people. Most people are not in Socialist Workers' orbit of agreeing with Socialist Worker. And revolutionaries face the hostility of the ruling class. That's the easy bit, to be honest. There was a short period, I won't go into the detail why, but there was a short period in which Socialist Worker was mentioned 3 times in the House of Commons in the last couple of years. It was because we'd leaked some documents about the Trade Union Act. And I was delighted. I didn't mind there were these Tories saying what a terrible thing it was. So that's the easy bit. The hostility of the ruling class is the easy bit. The difficult bit is the indifference of the oppressed and exploited. That's the harder bit that revolutionaries have to deal with. And revolutionaries have the task of seeking to change the views of people around them, to see society in a new way, and to act upon it, to start to do things differently. And that's a big and difficult task, because you have to find a way in which you can enable people to see a link between the principles of a socialist organisation, their own lived experience, and the tasks of the moment. So you can't just produce propaganda which says capitalism bad, socialism good. There's an organisation called the Socialist Party of Great Britain, a tiny organisation, which has for very many years, century, had essentially propaganda saying capitalism bad, socialism good. And it hopes eventually that people will, actually they have an electoral strategy, enough people will vote to say, yes, that's right, and now we'll have socialism, thank you very much. That's not our approach. Our approach is to connect with people as and where they are, to put them into action alongside revolutionaries, and in the process of that to win them to wider arguments about socialism. And our argument is that a socialist newspaper is critical to being able to do this. Let me just say that's not something that comes simply from the International Socialists, the forerunners of the SWP, or the Socialist Workers Party itself. It's a long tradition. And it's a tradition that's been taken up by others as well. Let me take David Hilliard, for example, who was one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party in the United States in the 1960s. Hilliard wrote this: "We knew from the beginning how critical it was to have our own publication, to set forth our own agenda for freedom, to raise political consciousness among our people as to their oppressed state, to rebut government lies, to tell the truth, to urge change, to use the pen alongside the sword." And to be honest, what Hilliard was writing about in the 1960s, which is important because the Black Panthers clearly were an organisation that was different to that of a revolutionary tradition that came from the Bolsheviks, that saw themselves as different to that in many respects, was reflecting something that had been written 100 years previously by a man called Ernest Jones, who was one of the leaders of the Chartist movement in Britain. The Chartist was the first genuine working class movement in Britain and one of the first genuine working class movements in the whole of the world. And Ernest Jones wrote this: "The first and essential requirement of a movement is to have a means to record its proceedings, to communicate through, to appeal through, to exhort through, to defend through, and to reach through. It is the fundamental bond of union, the ensign of progress, and the means of argument. It is that which enables it to hold up its head amid the whirl of parties and to keep its various elements together." And it's interesting how similar the ideas of Ernest Jones in the 1850s were to David Hilliard in the 1960s. And they set out that sense of the newspaper as being something that can bring together different aspects of the organisation, different aspects of politics, and then to set people into activity. I like the idea, the ensign of progress. I'm thinking that perhaps should be a masthead for Socialist Worker in the future. And of course, the sharpest and clearest expression was by Lenin himself. The newspaper is not only a collective propagandist and a collective agitator, it is also an organiser. It may be compared to the scaffolding erected around a building under construction. The organisation which forms around this newspaper will be ready for everything, from upholding the banner, the prestige and the continuity of the party in periods of acute revolutionary depression, to preparing for the nationwide armed insurrection. That's quite a high bar, to be able to hold things together when times are difficult, and then be able to put people onto the streets and in the workplaces in terms of armed insurrection. Well, that remains our objective. Let's be honest about it. We hope one day to be able to have a front page of Socialist Worker which says it is time for the armed insurrection. I don't guarantee it will be this year, but nonetheless we hope to do so. And we certainly attempt what Lenin talks about there, and what others have talked about, in terms of being an educator, an organiser, and an agitator. What do we mean by that? Education, fairly simple. So we have articles in Socialist Worker and on our website which talk about the history of the Labour Party, or what Marx meant by socialism, or what a revolution is, or the roots of racism, whatever it may be. That's an educational aspect. Of course, it also has other aspects in it, but those are partly about saying, you haven't been taught this at school, you won't read it in the mass media. Here is a revolutionary's take on these sorts of questions. This is very, very important. Very, very important idea to communicate an experience and a tradition of revolutionary socialists. The organiser bit is, for example, to say we have to build stand up to racism long term. There's a big threat in the world today about the rise of racism. We require a big united front beyond simply revolutionaries, bringing people together, and therefore we need to build stand up to racism. That's an organising thing. It's not just a reflection on society. It is about trying to organise revolutionaries and the people around them. And to be honest, one shouldn't underestimate the importance of that, because the first audience for any revolutionary newspaper is the members of its own organisation. It's not the only audience. If it were, it would be sort of like a posh party notes. But it's not that. But the members do matter. You have to think about if you look at the Bolsheviks' papers, for example, quite often the number of papers they sold is very similar to the number of papers they sold is similar to the number of members of the Bolsheviks. Not that they only sold to Bolsheviks, but the numbers are quite similar. This is important. And the third bit is agitation. Onto the streets against Trump on the 13th of July, onto the streets against Robinson on the 14th of July. That's agitation. It's not calm explanation of ideas. It's not saying, here's a long-term programme. It is saying, here are 2 key dates, and you all need to be on the streets. And this still matters very much. Still very much that when comrades take the paper out to sell it, the comrade selling it, she or he knows, here are some clear things that we want people to do. And obviously the scale of that and how you do that depends upon circumstances. On and off, I've been working for Socialist Worker for nearly 30 years. We once had the headline, General Strike Now. Once. The idea of a general strike is a good idea. We are for a general strike. But you can only raise the question of a general strike when the situation makes it an idea which feels real to lots of people. It was 1992 during the pit crisis. You remember incredible that we had it during John Major's rule. But anyway, that we had it, the John Major, they closed down the whole section of pits. And although they'd smashed the miners previously in 84, 85, there was a massive feeling about this. And actually, for a couple of weeks, the slogan, General Strike Now, actually fitted with quite a large number of workers. And partly, I suppose, what we do each week in Socialist Worker is to weigh up where do we stand between a headline that we had quite often in the 1990s, What Went Wrong, which was a headline we had more than once in Socialist Worker. That's one end, and the other end is General Strike Now. And you have to think, well, I suppose armed insurrection now, but at least General Strike Now, you have to think where you are on that continuum. So this is, I think, whatever, and I'm not saying that what we do at Socialist Worker or socialistworker.co.uk is the final answer to all of these questions. But the task is always there for the revolutionaries to speak to a wider audience and to begin to persuade people to be active, to stop believing the boss's lies, and to come over to be active on our side and to listen to socialist arguments. It also has specific questions that apply only to a newspaper. In particular, the relationship between reader and seller. And this is about revolutionary newspapers, by the way. And when my Financial Times is delivered at 5:30 every morning, the person delivering it doesn't knock on my door and says, would you like to sign a petition against Brexit? Even though the Financial Times would clearly like that to happen. When you buy The Guardian, They don't say, would you like to sign a petition against Jeremy Corbyn? Or, you know, that's not the relationship. Our relationship is different. When we sell the paper, it's not just, here it is, that's £1, thank you very much. It is, one hopes at least, that people say, oh, have you heard about we're having a demonstration next week? Have you thought about coming to one of our meetings? Would you like to sign this petition? Or actually quite often starts with, would you like to sign this petition? And because of that, there is a relationship between the reader and the seller which does not exist on a website. Websites are good for very many things. They don't have that direct eyeball-to-eyeball I said confrontation, didn't I? Interaction between the buyer and the seller about this question. And this is very important, I think. It's very important for revolutionaries. It's not so important for other publications which don't attempt to organise, or organise in different ways. And I'm not saying that the only way we do it, the way we do it is the only way to do it, but I think this is an important part of what a revolutionary newspaper enables someone to do. And therefore, it has a different role to that of the mass media. Now, I want to rush through a very swift history of Socialist Worker, just because it's of interest to people, particularly if you're newer to this, and also maybe we learn some lessons about it. Socialist Worker was launched on the 7th of September 1968. There was a whole number of publications before that which fed into it, but it was launched on 7th of September 1968. It had one full-time journalist, one typewriter, one Varitype machine, which is something you have to put all the words in twice in order to make the stuff come out the other end of it. And 200 yards away in the corner of a commercial print shop, there was one printer using a third-hand machine. It was 4 pages, and it came out really, I don't know whether Jim Nicol is still here, but he can talk very interestingly about this, because it was 1968. And you know what happened in 1968, the defeat of the Americans in Vietnam, Tet Offensive, it wasn't the final bit, but it was absolutely crucial, the biggest general strike in history up to that point in France, and so on and so on. This isn't a meeting on 68, so don't get me started. And because of that, people in the International Socialists, the forerunner of the Socialist Workers Party, said, we need to have a different paper, a new paper. Indeed, so fevered was the political atmosphere that they were set up to launch in September, and then in August, the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia happened, and they had to produce a special edition. And they were very, very proud that they managed to get it from beginning to coming off the press within 6 hours. 2 sides. To be honest, we couldn't print something in 6 hours now because we have a commercial printer. But, that's at least we'd have it on the website in 6 minutes. But this was the fevered political atmosphere in which something was happening. And it set out in the first issue a sort of echo of Lenin and Ernest Jones and David Hilliard in these ways. We intend to tell the truth about your fight, the workers' fight, and we plan to provide you with facts and figures to aid those struggles. We hope you like our paper. We hope you'll grow to think of it as your paper. And it's very clear it's about workers. One of the arguments about 68 was, is this just about students? Is this about new classes in the global south? Or is it about the working class? And Socialist Worker was very clear. The name, Socialist Worker, and we hope you'll feel it's your paper, truth about your fight, the workers' fight. It's very, very clear. It's not because they were uninterested. It was quite good for this, and I can do this, can't I? It wasn't not they were uninterested in other aspects of politics, particularly the question of racism, but because the argument the working class is central was still incredibly important to have. So, this graphic, which Yuri Prasad reminds me he constructed, and which is his by copyright, shows, here we go. France shows the way for workers in Britain. We're off with the new Socialist Worker. And as 68 went on, the struggle continued to rise for a very long period. So here it begins to get 8 pages and so on. It becomes a much bigger newspaper. More pages and redesign as revolt spreads. And then in Britain, you have the continuing increase. The miners' strikes of 1972 and 1974, the Pentonville Dockers, a whole range of occupations, essentially a Tory government driven out by workers' action. So 73, it gets bigger again. You can see the masthead changes, for those of you who are interested in those sorts of things. More pages and a bigger print run. The print run, now, there's a lot of argument about how many papers we sold. And there's a slight elision, which you can read in the literature, between how many we sold and how many we printed. These are not always the same thing. You may be shocked at that, but there's not always. We don't always sell them all. You may think you're the only one who sticks some in the recycling box at the end of the week. You're not. So it's a bit unclear. But here, from the strikes of the 70s and the occupations, the print run was about 45,000. It's a lot, you know, and they sold, I mean, you can normally think people sell half to 2/3. So, you know, that's a very impressive figure. We don't sell that many now, I regret to tell you. And then 76, it's relaunched, a different mastheads, again, readership growing, although here, the downturn in workers' struggle is almost about to begin. This is just where I joined, just when the downturn began. I'm still waiting. And then there are both technical developments and political developments. This paper is for the era of Seattle, the anti-capitalist movement, and the anti-war movement, where obviously we were talking to a huge audience of people, you know, on demonstrations of 2 million people, on every week in Stop the War meetings, huge audience of people, and you can see this incredible technological breakthrough. It is in colour. It is in colour. 2004. There is still some revolution newspapers that print in spot colour, which is what these are. They just have a bit of red on it. The MPA's paper in France still looks like this. But, you know, most modern newspapers, we embraced colour. The first few times we tried to do it, it was a complete disaster. Looking back on it now, it's embarrassing because the print was terrible. But by here, we'd got it together, really. We had one in 2003 where we did the big anti-war demo. And you can sort of see what it is as a picture, but it's not great, to be honest with you. By here, it was very, very clear. And this paper, which is, you know, during the back end of the anti-war movement and so on, was an attempt to relate to that new audience. And then here, 2012, as a combination of technical reasons and political reasons, it's a smaller newspaper, but it has more pages on it. And this is the size that most newspapers are. And because clearly, we have to think about what other newspapers look like. You know, there is a relationship between what people expect. And one of the things we've been proud of in Socialist Worker is to try and have something that is truthful, that doesn't bullshit, doesn't tell you that everything's going swimmingly when it's not, can be relied upon. If I read that fact in Socialist Worker and I go to my student meeting or my trade union meeting and I produce that fact, so people are going to say, no, it's nonsense, that's not true at all, that's, you know, that has to be avoided, and looks professional and stands up. It doesn't want to look scrappy and useless. It's a professional product, and that we try very hard at. This is the quick run through the 50 years. So, you know, you don't have to do that bit from the floor. In the last 10 minutes, though, I want to talk about some developments in terms of social media, because it's very, very important what's happening. And it's obviously a huge thing for the bourgeois media. It's a huge thing. You know, selling newspapers is really difficult now. And it's going to get more difficult, because young people are not brought up to read newspapers. And there are lots of free newspapers. You know, there's the Metro in most parts of Britain. You get a free newspaper in the morning. If you're in London, you get the Evening Standard. They're both free, and they're not bad, actually, in terms of, you know, they're quite chunky things. They're not just adverts, there's stuff in it as well. And you can see here, These are all from the Reuters Institute University of Oxford study, which is a sort of definitive thing. This came out about 2 months ago. So it's quite reliable. And you can see this is where people get their news from, 2013 to 2018. If I took it back even further, it would be sharper. But you can see here, online, something like 75% of people. It's very, very clear. Online, including social media. Television, falling. Television used to be right up there at the top of it, so to less than social media. More people get their news from social media than they do from television. Social media, online. Social media itself, you can see, coming here in 2013, only 20%, rising to 40%. And printed newspapers, a big fall. This is Britain, right? From 60% down to, what is it? 35, 36%. Huge fall. That's just in 5 years. That's a massive transformation of where people get their news from. Interestingly, it goes up here, 2016, 2017. Now, why was that? Any thoughts? Any thoughts? The referendum is one good thought. There's a second one. The election. People during elections tend to buy newspapers more because they think, oh, I better read something about this, and it goes up a bit. But we can't ignore this. We can't ignore this. As I say, all the arguments about revolutionary newspapers still stand for me, but this is a reality. Where do people get their news from? And of course, far more people read Socialist Worker online than they do read the printed product. Of course. Of course. The difference is what you can do with them. You see, one of the arguments about Socialist Worker is, to use a slightly technical term, juxtaposition. That means putting things next to each other. So I might pick up Socialist Worker this week and say, I'm very interested in the question of fighting Tommy Robinson. And I know they've got something on that, and so I'll read that, and I don't like Trump, and I'll read that. And then I'll discover in it something about the Wigan health workers, which I know nothing about because that's not on the news. But I get an idea that there might be a link between fighting Trump and Robinson and the Wigan health workers. And then further back, there will be an article which perhaps will have some history or some theory, which I might engage with as well, and the revolutionary paper puts all these bits together. Not in different sections, but has them next door to each other. And that's different to what you can do with a website. Of course, with a website, you try and get people from one to the other, but it's very unlikely that people would look at 20 articles on a website. Or how many do we have in Socialist Worker? We probably have 40 articles, or more, actually, when I think about it, in Socialist Worker, which, having bought this thing, there you are, they're all stuck next to each other. I realise the problem with this, I'm probably going in and out of the camera, aren't I? So I'll try and keep within this bit for you. But this is a reality. Right, bit more of that. This is use of social media in different places in the world. So you can see Brazil is top, 66%, slightly down actually, but USA 45, Britain 39, France 36, Germany 31. So there's a big section here, and then it's much higher in Brazil. Probably because, I'm slightly guessing here, newspapers are less able to, in a big country, it's a bit like America, getting a national newspaper is quite a hard thing to do. But you can see, source of news in the last week, it's a considerable number of people. This one, and this is a very interesting one because it tells you about a trend. This is about use of social networks for news in the last week. Now, we'll just see how alive the audience is. This one is Facebook, good. This one? Yeah. Messenger, good, yeah. Instagram, Snapchat, thank you. We're getting fewer as we go down, but that's... at least some people know what they all are. Now, most of them are quite low, but they're going up. The ones at the bottom, Snapchat, Instagram, Messenger, and so on, are going up. The really interesting one here is Facebook, which has risen for a long time and now is on the downslope. And, you know, there are many reasons for this. If you talk to younger people, and they do this on the Reuters survey, They say, Roy, Facebook is out of date, don't feel like it's my thing, bit like one of my uncles trying to be hip, that sort of feel about Facebook. Although most revolutionary papers, this is crucial, and it's still a lot of people, still a huge number of people, but it's declining, and the ones that are going up are the ones in which people say they feel more networked. So groups of people on WhatsApp, for example, who are sharing news stories with each other and then discussing them in a smaller group rather than in the forum of Facebook, which tells you that you have to try and be part of these sorts of discussions that are going on. The other thing about Facebook is, and this will shock you, it wasn't set up to disseminate revolutionary propaganda. It was set up in order to make money. And therefore, there is a war going on by Facebook, and by many others, by the way, to monetize traffic on Facebook, which is why if you ever type pair of slippers into your internet browser, you will be hunted for weeks afterwards on Facebook with people putting up adverts of slippers. And it follows you around. I mean, it's quite scary, actually, in some senses. You don't have to type it to Facebook, you have to just type it into Google, and then it will follow you around. So, and that's what it tries to do. And Facebook is deliberately trying to depoliticize its medium. It's made it harder for people. Partly under the guise of a war on fake news, but also because they want to drive out what they see as extreme views and to make it more amenable to selling things to individuals. One of the interesting things is the increase in the number of people who are prepared to pay for media. For a long time, nobody was prepared to pay for it at all. And you can see this is the United States, because it's the sharpest example. The 2018 is the, what is that, orange? Something like that, bar, and the other one's blue, the orangey brown thing. And you can see, if you're on the left, in the last year, 29% of people have paid for online news. Now, why is that? Trump. Trump is what that's about. It's about people saying, I'm surrounded by lies. I might be prepared to pay some money if I thought I got something back from it. So, and you can see, if you're on the right, you don't mind getting lies. You quite like it, really. I'll just watch Fox News, thank you very much. That will tell me all I need to know about it. If you're on the centre, whatever that bloody means. I mean, this is Hillary Clinton, I imagine, but this is God knows, so that's probably the right of the Democrats or something. No, that can't be. That's that one. Anyway, but that's you get the picture. And this one exemplifies what I spoke about earlier. This is Facebook's referral to news websites. And you can see, this is all new websites. It's not just about the left. This is about Facebook driving down what you see in front of you, because you don't see everything in front of you from all your friends on Facebook. There's an algorithm that sorts it out for you and tells you what you're going to see. Here's the first Facebook algorithm change in the summer 2017. You see it's going down a bit, but it goes down much more sharply after that. And then here's the one which deprioritizes less meaningful news content. Less meaningful, by which it means people like us. And you can see this actually in some of the figures for Socialist Worker. It becomes harder to get our stuff read on Facebook. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this bit of it, but I want to say that fundamentally the first half is what the discussion is about. The first half is a discussion about how revolutionaries get their ideas across, because we still face this massive problem that there is a mass media dominated by the right wing, dominated by the ideas of the capitalist class, and there isn't yet enough struggle to change people's ideas. People's ideas are changed best in a situation of rising struggle, which is why the paper was launched in 1968 at a time of massive struggle. Doesn't mean that you can't change some people's ideas. If that were true, none of us would be here. You can win some people, but You need actually a higher level of struggle than we have now to get millions of people to change their ideas. Nonetheless, it is absolutely critical we build socialist ideas and build revolutionary organisation. For us, the Socialist Worker newspaper is central to doing that. We will have around it many other methods as well, but selling the paper, buying the paper, pushing the paper, reading the paper is still central to what we do. Thank you.
Yeah, I did have to have some of those symbols explained to me. And even though Julie Sherry's 25 years younger than me, she got me to join Facebook a couple of years ago around the doctors' dispute, so maybe I am in the uncle-auntie category. And I just wanted to say, for me, Socialist Worker, is a tool for organising, but I kind of carry it around as a badge of honour. And when I joined the party in 1987, before that, I'd buy it for 30p, and I know we're not just all going down memory lane, but I did buy it from somebody who sold it outside my hospital week in, week out, and I felt sorry for him. And then I'd proudly leave it lying around, and consultants would say, "Good God, whose is this?" And I was really proud of it. I've sort of lost that a bit, and I'm also not just going to do a confession. When I joined the party in 87, my party card said, a member takes and sells Socialist Worker. And probably because I wanted to do it properly, I did. And people got used to me, and I would sometimes stand with it strapped to my chest. And I've just sort of made myself do that. I'm conscious that not necessarily everybody does, and it doesn't come naturally to you to carry around the paper. I do it now in circles where I sit on a national executive of a union who's not particularly friendly to Socialist Worker, and it's kind of like my friend there, and I do it to wind people up. And when they start talking about something, I rifle through Socialist Worker to see what it's saying about it. And I think other people people occasionally buy it from me, but I do have to, I have to make myself keep selling it at work, and even if I sell one or two, it makes me feel better, and it also makes them hopefully wear it as a badge of honour as well. So keep selling the paper, and if you haven't done it before, comrades, do it.
A few years ago, when UKIP was on the up, we had a front page against UKIP. Very prominent front page. And I remember going down to the stall on a Saturday with comrades who were quite nervous about it, saying we're going to get a lot of stick. Actually, what we got was queues of people at the stall signing the petitions and wanting to buy the paper. People were sick of UKIP, and we were turning round the atmosphere where everybody supported UKIP, where everybody felt everybody around them supported UKIP. That actually is a very important role. During the Corbyn boom, actually we were part of that movement. The stalls we ran actually sold huge numbers of papers, and we were part of that boom. But at the minute, it's a bit more tricky, isn't it? At the minute, people are not sure if Corbyn can deliver, they're not sure if he can get elected, and therefore the 2 or 3 minute conversation on the street, I think, is still important, and we still need to do it, but I think we need longer conversations with people. And that means the sales that you make, as the comrades just said, to your workmates actually is extremely important. Going round to people and repeat selling them so you can have a longer discussion as the process with Corbyn develops actually is important to winning them. People who join the Labour Party on the Corbyn boom aren't going to break with that just like that. They need to have arguments about what's happened in Greece or what's happened with Tallulah in Brazil or whatever, and that means a regular ongoing contact. So whilst I'm not in any way at all saying that the Saturday stalls aren't important, I think they're fantastically important. By the way, they're particularly important because we cannot afford to cede the streets to Tommy Robinson supporters, and that means we need a lot of people on those stalls, and we need to be very, very confident. And if there is a Tommy Robinson supporter, and we've had them in Bristol wandering past and they want to have an argument, they very much feel in the minority, they very much feel outnumbered, and we have to make sure that carries on. But I think that building sales, repeat selling to people, do you want the paper delivered to you regularly, something we used to do a lot of, I think we need to go back to. Just want to say something else about the racism thing. You know, in the 1970s with the Anti-Nazi League, if you looked at the demonstrations for the Anti-Nazi, often the core of those demonstrations, particularly in London, were people from hospitals and schools bringing 20 or 30 people from their hospital or school with them on those demonstrations. How did they do that? They did it because one comrade would have 2 or 3 buyers of Socialist Worker around them in the staff room or in the office or whatever, and those people could mobilise a much wider layer out there. Just 2 final points. Firstly, if young members, when they join, if they don't sell the paper, they don't feel responsible for defending the politics in it. How do you become a cadre? How do you become a Bolshevik? You become a Bolshevik by defending the ideas. When you sell the paper, you are forced to defend those ideas. And I can remember branch meetings where people would come back and say, I was selling the paper and someone said to me, what about this, what about that? And the second half of the branch meeting often was taken up by people answering the questions of people saying, how do I respond to this? So I think the idea of actually this is a means by which we become better Bolsheviks by carrying the arguments that we need to make out there. So yes, I think we have to maintain that presence on the streets, particularly important at the moment, but actually ongoing conversations, taking the paper to people at work, and everybody's, a lot of young people now say workplaces are too atomised. Actually, if you look back in history, they're no more atomised now, and there's plenty of potential to organise.
I think one of the best things about socialist work is to use a phrase, it stands on the shoulders of giants. There's a great man, Paul Foot, who's obviously one of the best journalists, full stop, wrote a collection of articles in the heat of the struggle. And I think that's the thing about Socialist Worker. It's always in the heat of the struggle. No matter how hard, how tough, how bloody desperate, how it seems again and again we can lose, sometimes we win. And when you see people like the Wigan striker last night, it's not an accident that she's at Marxism speaking at our event, because the heat of the struggle, that tradition carries on. And one of the things I'm proud about, whether it's Ireland or the Pitts dispute in 84 and 1992, as Charlie said, Socialist Worker and Socialist Worker members, far too small as we know, but always there, always trying to carry the arguments in particularly difficult circumstances. And I don't want to steal his thunder, but I hope Tom Ash from the paper speaks about the far right stuff, because I think Socialist Worker, Unite Against Fascism, Stand Up to Racism, we're carrying an argument, are we not, about the whole nature of the far right in this country. We took great inspiration, well, everyone did, great inspiration around a Berlin anti-fascist demonstration recently against the fucking AFD, and in a much more modest way we'll try and replicate some of that on the week on Saturday. But I think carrying the arguments matters. It matters when people, even on the left, were all over the shop when Gordon Brown made his argument of British jobs for British workers and conceded to racism. Some of the left, as we know internationally, still concede to Islamophobia with horrific consequences. But I think in terms of the FLA, now the DFLA, I think we're taking people with us. I was very pleased the other day, the Key People to Show Racism Red Card, anti-racist football campaign, used a whole series of our arguments on the conference floor at one of the major trade unions. I know he used our arguments because he rang us up an hour before and said, what do you think I should say? Now that's good. That's good. We need more of that. We need more of that in workplaces, etc., etc., etc. I don't get to sell the paper as often as I used to be able to, but a few of my mates who still buy it will say, you would Socialist Worker, Joe said the other day, you play an incredibly important role at the moment, and have done, in terms of patiently going through arguments about the likes of the FLA, for instance, when other people on the left, not pointing fingers at him, it's just the truth, didn't want to know, or in other cases, it's too difficult an argument. Well, for fuck's sake, if we can't beat the likes of the FLA or DFLA, we might as well go home. And secondly, moreover, obviously try and get over the urgency of the thing. And, as people will know, I'm sure, the last two demonstrations in London were not something to write home about. Now, I think July the 14th we'll see in terms of our side, but there's a whole number of people in the trade union movement, people of faith and so on. When you hear people as well in a number of Labour Party groups are mobilising, talking of taking serious numbers to July the 14th. Where are they getting a lot of those arguments? People in this room, frankly. You hear this in Islington, in Kent, in Tottenham, in Manchester and Liverpool, and people should talk about the role the paper's played in mobilising people. Well, we did have a success against the FLA in Manchester recently. It was one success. But it didn't uplift people's morale, and it gave people the spirit and the confidence to come out again for other things. So I think over the FLA and the far right and racism, Stand Up to Racism, the refugee stuff people have done around Calais, Socialist Workers in the front, no two ways, right? And we should be proud of that and obviously work on it.
I think Charlie's spot on about the role of the paper, about the importance of having relationships. As a journalist, that actually meeting somebody is far, far better than any amount of email conversations. And when you meet someone, it puts you in good stead for years years to come with that person. Trying to build the party, it's absolutely essential to meet people face to face. I don't think that we're right in saying we're unique in trying to form a relationship with the audience. Any bourgeois publisher worth their salt is desperate to form communities because they want to monetize, in inverted commas, those communities. So there are techniques that we can learn from that. I would like to say, though, I thought that it was a bit squeezed at the end. I absolutely agree we need to use the paper, but there's a lot we can do to address some of the problems that Charlie talked about. So the question of juxtaposition, it's absolutely right how you use the paper, how you try and take people from one article to the next, that it can be accidental. We can do a lot more. We can do a lot more with Breakfast in Red. You know, it doesn't have to be two stories. It can link people to the longer form articles in the paper. It can link people to packages of stuff. All this stuff can be done with not a lot more effort. It requires somebody to take it on board, but not a lot more effort. The other thing we can do, the algorithm on Facebook is working against us. They're trying to make not only rip off the publishers by getting content for free, but then they're trying to make the publishers pay to promote their work. But we're not using what the bourgeois publishers call the network effect. We're not doing it anywhere enough in the party. People aren't retweeting, aren't doing the Facebook stuff. The groups aren't pushing it out. And actually, I think we need a centralised drive from what would have been the circulation office, but now it's whatever. We actually need to do that. We talked about it at conference, but it's something that we really, really need to do. So we can package up our material much better to get it out to a wider audience. Make newsletters every day, which are a mini newspaper, effectively an online mini newspaper. And the other thing I'd like to see, my last point is, we don't compete on all forms of media. We don't do television. We never did. We do need to do more video. I'd like to see us try some podcasts. All the young people I know are really into podcasts, and there's no shortage of spoken word in the SWP. And I'm sure we could do something with that.
Hi, I'm from Scarborough on the northeast coast, and I want to talk just a little bit about how we use Socialist Worker to kind of create a club, if you like, around a really tiny number of revolutionary socialists. One of the ways that happens is on the street, on those Saturday sales, in a place that is one of the forgotten towns, and therefore has got its really fair share of right-wingers on the streets. Those occasions on which you're standing on the street with defend refugees, or kick Tommy Robinson, or whatever the slogan is. There's a tiny number of people that will resonate with enough that they're going to come over and talk to you, and that kind of bond that you make in that instance, even if you don't see them again for weeks or even months, is really important. But the other thing is as well that we are using it to create a club, not just around the people we sell the paper to, which we do outside the Labour Party, we do around trying to stand up to racism, we have done in our fracking campaign, but also by trying to get people to accept Socialist Worker as a working class newspaper that takes our campaign seriously and is part of our campaign. So to get people to create content for Socialist Worker from those campaigns, for us, has been really important. Getting people to write a letter into the paper, getting them to think through the issues, if they've got a bad shoulder, to think about what that means in terms of their ability to campaign for fracking and so on and so forth. And that's been really, really important for me, actually, over the past fortnight, because we were involved in a campaign in which I was identified as a key anti-racist in the town, and therefore had what was supposedly my address printed in a newspaper. The fact that Socialist Worker would take up solidarity with me on an individual level means that we can actually create, as part of that club, something that links those national and global issues of racism with what's happening at a local level, and it's cementing a group of people around us that is going to be absolutely crucial for the struggles to come.
Yeah, I wanted to start talking with the recent UCU strike, which I had the privilege of being involved with. I work at a place called Imperial College London, a very august and rather elite institution for anybody that knows anything about it, but also really quite a weak union branch. The last national strike we had, I think we had 10 pickets. That was before I got there. This year's strikes, the first day's strike, we had 120 people on picket lines. Now, what that meant was that, sorry, it has nothing to do with me, I can assure you, but the point I wanted to make about that is that it completely changed my ability to push Socialist Worker. To be perfectly honest, I've read Socialist Worker for many years since I joined the SWP. Sometimes you take it for granted. But one of the things that stops you taking it for granted is when new people discover the paper and find out how relevant it is to them. During our strike, I'm a bit anal about these things, so I'm afraid I know that on the first week of the strike, 25 people across the different picket lines bought a copy of Socialist Worker. Not only that, I know their names, right? But the reason that's helpful to me is that I've now got 25 people around the university that I know I can go and speak to, that I've shared something in common with, that I've discovered as a result of joint struggle which has brought us closer together, and therefore I know that I'm going to be able to have conversations with people that I really couldn't have dreamed of having in the 4 years that I worked there before that strike. So the point about Socialist Worker is about in the heat of the struggle, as Paul said. That's absolutely right, because during the strike, the paper made sense to people. It fitted with their experiences and was talking, particularly in the daily bulletins that were coming out from the journalist that's sitting next to me there. Absolutely fantastic and really important steer on what was happening with the strike up and down the country. Now you get to after the strike, 4 months after the strike, I now sell 3 copies of Socialist Worker. Why is that? Maybe I'm shit, okay, but the general thing, the reason for that is that actually the experiences of being in strike have faded for lots of people and it's back to the same old shit. However, there's a connection between the strike and what was happening more widely, because one of the things that was really important about Socialist Workers' coverage during the strike was the stand-up to racism stuff, the need to organise against the right. So that when it came to the national stand-up to racism demonstration this year, for the first time in years, our union banner was there and 3 people were there. 2 of them were people, besides myself, that read Socialist Worker every week. That's the link, I think, between Socialist Worker and building the ability of our side to fight and feel better confidence in their own ability to fight and being able to start generalising that with the people they work with.
I take on board a lot of the points that Mike Simmons made about how the party could be better in terms of the kind of online presence and podcasts. Can you not hear? Is that better? Up a bit. Up a bit. I'll just take it out. Is that better? Yeah, I was just saying that I take on board a lot of the points that Mike Simons made about how the party's online presence could be better, the podcasts and different things can be done. I think that should be done. However, I do think the party's upped its game in the last couple of years in terms of the online presence and so on. So, for instance, to early in the morning to get a Socialist Worker article about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez having that fantastic victory in the primary in New York, but also an interview with someone from the Democratic Socialists within a couple of hours. That didn't happen a few years ago. I think that's a kind of major kind of progression from where we're at. And I believe in that all those things need to happen. Having said that, because I think there's a tradition, or people that used to be part of our tradition have dumped the paper in the way that we use it. That, people like Counterfire and other people have dumped that kind of idea of relating to people in that way and say it's just social media or nothing. So it should be to the exclusion of all the things that we've been talking about. And, Charlie was mentioning 1992. I think one of the things for me about that, the sales then, is that, for instance, in Stratford, I suspect this happened right around the country, from one week, one Saturday, selling 20 papers, to 100 the next week. I think that informed our position around the kind of general strike and so on, of what we were going to put on the front pages and that kind of experience of how we kind of related and so on. But also, just today, there's someone coming to Marxism, she's in the Labour Party, she reads Socialist Worker cover to cover. There's lots of people around us that are like that. Those are the people we kind of build a relationship with. Those are the people that will take the influence in terms of getting people out on the streets on the 13th and, importantly, on the 14th. Cheers.
Right, okay. I work on Socialist Worker. I just wanted to go back to a few things that Charlie said about just how much of a minority we're in as a revolutionary party. Because I think that a lot of the time when people buy the paper, there's things in it that we would take, well, revolutionaries would take for granted, you know, a lot of the things, you know, the nature of the state, police racism, you know, wars, the reality of wars, imperialism and so on. That's all quite, you know, bog standard stuff for us, but for a lot of people, you know, that's quite shocking stuff. I remember, like, I first bought a paper, I think I was 14, and there was a tiny little story in it about how abortion, your access to abortion depended on where you lived, and it was about, like, rationing in the health service or, you know, the state of funding or whatever. Like, now, I would think, well, obviously, it depends on where you live, but at that age, I was completely shocked. It was like, what? It depends, you know, you might not be able to get access to an abortion if you live in an area that's, you know, the NHS is in a worse state and so on. So I think we can't underestimate what our paper does in terms of the information it brings. It's not all common sense to people. They're not familiar with it. We're bringing quite complicated ideas and, you know, quite shocking facts to people, really. And I also think that, you know, the amount of times, really, that over the years, when I've been doing the stall, and people have come up and actually say, oh, thank you for being here, you know, thanks for doing this. And I think it, you know, us being there publicly with our paper, it shows that, you know, everyone's not right-wing. You know, the people who are a bit pissed off about some aspect of society, they can see, oh, somebody else thinks that, you know? Because a lot of the time they can think, well, the whole of the world is right-wing. I mean, that's what they're told. They're told that everyone agrees, you know, everyone's got this basic consensus and so on. And I think us being publicly there, showing that, you know, actually there is opposition. And it's not just the ideas, it's like Charlie said, you know, we're trying to engage people in activity. So once you've sold someone a paper on whatever issue they might be interested in, they've got all these other articles they can read, they'll learn stuff that they don't know, they'll hear arguments they weren't aware of, but also someone will have given a leaflet about a meeting or a protest or whatever. And this is the key thing. It's not just about here's some interesting ideas or some interesting facts. It's about trying to build an organisation that can change the world, and I think that's why, you know, we need to keep selling the paper and why it's so important.
Hi, comrades. Yeah, so I want to talk about, so one of the things that's I think is really important in the paper is, I believe it's page 12 every time, and that's the page where it shows all the branch meetings that are happening. Because I think one thing that is really important in our movement is to make sure that we don't just get people reading material and saying, oh, look at all these people on strike. Oh, look at all these people fighting for their rights. It's wonderful that people are doing this. Obviously, it's important to get people up to speed in that. It's also important to get them active and get them involved and learning more stuff and discussing things and part of that discussion. And I think that's why it's so important that when we're doing paper sales, we have the paper and it's saying, can you buy this? And also saying, can you come to this meeting? Can you come to Marxism? You know, or can you come to this demo? And all of that. And that's something that the paper does really well, and that the idea of juxtaposition that Charlie talked about is very important. I also want to talk a little bit about the online stuff and how one of the strengths of it, I feel, is the fact that you can share it very widely and very easily and very quickly, which is important. And when you're having a discussion with somebody, maybe you can go, hey, here's the article which explains my position or something. The other thing that I think is important is the fact that, let's say something happens on a Friday, some political crisis somewhere in the world, literally within a couple of hours, I will be able to find a socialist, you know, anti-capitalist, revolutionary position on this thing and be able to enter into these discussions well-informed. And it also means that when I go onto a paper sale, I can be up to date with all the stuff, even if it is a Sunday or even a Tuesday at a Swiss meeting, you know, and I can be up to date with the current, really, really current political issues, and that's something that is kind of the strength of both the online stuff as well as the paper itself. And that's why I'm really proud of how it works, and just keep going with it.
I just wanted to talk a bit about the low level of struggle, because that sort of impacts on the workplace I've been in for the past 10 months. And there's a metaphor from Marx, I think, about before the water turns to steam, which is the general strike sort of revolutionary situation, it has to be warmed up. And when you're in a workplace, I think on Facebook you can choose, you can be in a left bubble there. I am on Facebook and I do share. But in the workplace, because of the low level of struggle, our side is lack of confidence, isn't it? People are bombarded with the idea, all these ideas in my workplace about we've got no strength, unions are all dead, we can't do anything about it. Everybody's totally pissed off, basically. And the other side is that there's lack of beds. I work in the NHS, and that's all the fault of all the unhealthy people and people who smoke and immigrants and all, you know all this. So that's the sort of balance in the... And I find socialist work absolutely essential for switching that balance and warming the water up a little bit. Because in socialist work and nowhere else, you get reports like the cleaners strike, the house care workers strike, the university colleges strike, and you just drop it into the conversation at lunchtime, and off you go. Great big discussions out of nowhere. And it's only because Socialist Worker is there. And the facts and figures about the freaking royal family, I was able to shut the right up because of the facts and figures in Socialist Worker about the bloody, well, you know it, you read it. But people who don't, they need to hear this stuff because it gives them confidence as well. A colleague, her daughter, home care worker, being under attack and all the rest of it, being able to tell her from Socialist Worker about the strike in Birmingham and the solidarity and what was happening, that warms the water up. It gives our side a bit more confidence, or a lot more confidence. And it's something that people don't hear from anyone else. Nobody is saying we can fight and win. And people really need to hear that. People way outside our ranks. And in the workplace, everybody, all the ideas are there. I've got UKIP supporters, we've got lefties, you know? And Socialist Worker, it's the ammunition, and we need it. And when you talk to people about that, people realise what's in Socialist Worker, then people obviously want to buy it and read it. But that's the purpose of it. I find it really, really useful. So keep bloody publishing it.
Yeah, my name is Tom Ash. I'm a journalist on Socialist Worker as well. I think when people ask, is it worth it? Because it's quite unique what we do in terms of producing revolutionary newspaper. It's worth about thinking about what it is that we're doing. And Socialist Worker is important in terms of bringing news that people haven't heard about, a new perspective on things. But we're not just alternative media. We are the newspaper of the SWP with the aim of building a revolutionary organisation that can try and have a front page that says armed insurrection at one end of it. And that's what we're trying to do. And therefore, when you think about what we prioritise, that's why obviously the print is important, and also the stuff that we do online. We have Breakfast in Red, which is our morning briefing. I'll be leafleting hard for it at the end. And the reason that's important is because that builds an audience of people who come back to you. It's not when you sell Socialist Worker on the street, it's not just sort of selling to sort of random people all the time. You hope that people will come back the next weekend, or if you sell outside a hospital, that you'll get a regular readership up of people who then can join or get involved with the party. Breakfast in Red also is an online way of trying to do that. WhatsApp as well, the little green symbol, which some of you knew what that was. That's also a way of doing that, and that's why we're prioritising that. What neither of those things can do, though, is actually build a sort of a cadre of revolutionaries within the organisation. When you send out Breakfast in Red, or you get a WhatsApp, you can forward it to someone, but it doesn't force you to stand over the politics. Just a brief trip down memory lane, 6 years. When I joined, the first newspaper I got was over the Egyptian Revolution. I thought, wow, this is fantastic. Workers are fighting back in Egypt, but really in the semi-feudal surroundings of Carmarthen in West Wales, I thought, God, workers changing the world. Could it really happen in Britain? And the fact that then comrades argued with me that, you have to go out and sell outside a hospital and talk to workers. Actually, that was part of the process, having to stand over the politics and winning me to the idea that workers can change the world within Britain as well. During the Corbyn recent rows of anti-Semitism, if you go to your Stand Up to Racism group, You're going to meet people who want to fight over fight for migrants' rights or fight over Islamophobia and so on and so forth. Not everyone is going to agree with us over Corbyn and anti-Semitism in Palestine. We were the only ones who had Defend Corbyn, Free Palestine on the front page. If you go to your stand-up to racism group and sell the paper, you have to stand over those politics. You can't shy away from putting forward those sort of revolutionary politics. So when thinking about how Socialist Worker can develop and how we can both in print and online, that's what we have to keep coming back to. We're not just simply about putting alternative media or left news. This is about building a revolutionary organisation that has the power to change the world through the self-emancipation of the working class.
I'll bring Charlie in now.
Okay, thanks to everyone who spoke. I realise the disadvantage of this is I can't say to the chair, oh, don't call them, because it becomes too loud. But anyway, not that I'd ever do that. Thanks to everyone who spoke. It was very helpful and a good discussion. I know we've got to finish bang on 1 o'clock, so I'll be clear. I'll just make 4 points. One is, several people spoke about coming out as a socialist by selling Socialist Worker. It's actually quite important. It forces people to do this, although I also think when people share things on Facebook and Twitter, it's quite helpful because it says, here I am, I'm a socialist, I'm asking you to read this, and people should, I hope, do that. I think it's very sharp to do it, selling the paper, and it's often we ask people to do quite tough things, during the height of the refugee issue, to sell a paper saying open the borders was quite a tough thing. It's not an obvious thing that people will think about. It's, asking people to do something difficult. To sell the paper Bitter Fruits of US Imperialism on the front page after 9/11 was asking quite a lot of people, to be honest. But, it's part of being a revolutionary that people do that they sell the paper. It means they have to stand over the politics of it. And it's often quite useful to do that. One of my earliest experiences was selling at a factory in Neath, near Swansea, called DS Smith's, which was a printing company on strike. I can remember the shop steward in front of 100 people holding up a copy of Socialist Worker and saying, "Who wrote this?" about the report in it. And rather nervously, I raised my hand. He said, "It's very good." I thought, "Oh, yes. Absolutely, yes. I knew you'd say that. Yeah, that's. Thank you very much. Yes." But, you sort of have to put yourself on the line around those sorts of questions. And, I think you can do it on social media. And it is important people share Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp and so on. Nonetheless, it's the most obvious way in which that happens. Secondly, I think campaigning is important as part of a revolutionary organisation. If I think about recently, the work that Sadie Robinson, who spoke earlier, about the work she did around Hillsborough, for example, is incredibly important in getting a profile for the paper and making people feel the paper is part of their campaigning work. The work that Tomasz has done around the FLA and the DFLA and so on is important and not easy. You can't just pick it off a shelf and say, here's the analysis of the FLA. It's not true. It's not the same as the Nazis. It's not quite the same as the EDL at the beginning, and so on. You have to think about that. Alistair Farrow, who I'm not sure who's here, has a particular animus about certain restaurant owners who don't pay their staff and hunts them down on a long-term basis. These sorts of things are quite important, I think. And I could go through each of the journalists and say that. I'm just picking them out because of the time. This is an important job that I think both in the printed paper and online we have to do. Finally, on social media, look, I am completely undefensive around these questions. I see Mary Smith there from the Irish organisation. There are things we can learn from the Irish organisation. There are things we can learn elsewhere. To be honest, a lot of what we do is a question of priorities and resources. And we need to have more socialists in Britain, and we need more organised socialists. And the point of Socialist Worker is precisely that, to think about how not just putting across ideas, but putting across ideas in a way which strengthens the working class movement, inoculates it against the poison of racism, which raises the level of struggle, which encourages more people to be inspired by the struggles that have taken place and to move forward, and to join the Socialist Workers Party. And we will be better on social media, selling the paper, getting our ideas across, the more people we have. And therefore, if you're interested in the sort of ideas that we've talked about today, if you want to be on the streets but also building for a different sort of society, we urge you to buy Socialist Worker, to read Socialist Worker, to sell Socialist Worker, to spread our products on social media, but also to join the Socialist Workers Party. Thank you.